Welcome back to Musical Connections. This is our interview segment, Next to Connect. Zach Snow here with you once again, and we are going to introduce you once again to singer-songwriter, filmmaker, composer, and all-around multi-talented man. For the second time here on the podcast, Ian Foster. How you doing, brother?
Good. Thanks for having me, Zach.
And welcome back to the podcast again. Congratulations on the release of your brand new album, Nerve. It's your second one in 2 years, and it's an entirely different direction for you as well. And also, I should mention, the last time I had you on, we talked about Close to the Bone. It was over the phone, but now we're here in this great new studio here. Yeah. So you're one of the many two-time guests I've had here on Musical Connections.
Very cool. Very cool.
Now, of course, off the hop here, how are things with you?
Good. Really busy these days, which is wonderful, especially after the last few years of strangeness and flux that we all know about.
Oh, don't be talking, man.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's been really good, and I've actually been doing a lot of film score work over the last couple of years, but especially even last month, there was sort of 3 films I was working on concurrently, which doesn't always happen, and it was certainly lots of work to try to make sure all that landed on deadline, but exactly what I wanted to be doing, so it was great.
Oh, for sure. Now, the new album you have out right now, by the time that this drops, is called Nerve. And after doing some research for this conversation here, I came across a quote, and the album is film meets classical composition. Mm-hmm. So I want to focus on that in particular. So who are some of your influences for this album? Do you take inspiration from, say, Rodgers Hammerstein, John Williams?
Those guys are obviously the heavyweights. So I'm sure in a way everything is influenced by them. But I guess more specifically for this one, there's a bunch of composers that I really love that kind of do straddle that line of film music. And most of them have done, the people I'm about to name have all done film scores as well as our touring artists with their instrumental music. So people like Ólafur Arnalds, who is an Icelandic composer, and he's sort of in the Sigur Rós camp, he bought their old studio, they're, in their little local scene, their buds.
Oh, wow.
And then Nils Fromm, who's a German composer. He did some music for Ad Astra, the Brad Pitt movie a number of years ago, but has a whole career, all on his own that I just love his stuff so much. And, they're, of course, the Max Richters of the world and all those kind of composers as well, but... I would say that this is an interesting album for me because the influences are so singular is the wrong word, but I suppose when you're a songwriter and you're writing songs and gradually adding to your lyrical catalog, when I would do a CD release for Close to the Bone, I would play those songs, but I'd add some from my previous work, This feels like enough of a left turn that... a lot of the influences are influences that didn't exist on the previous work,
Yeah.
So in that way, I think people might be kind of sonically surprised when they hear the record, just because it is a very, very different shift for me. But it still carries forward, I suppose, some of the sort of ambient, atmospheric stuff you would have heard in my other productions. So, it's at once a sort of progression, but also quite the shift.
Yeah, because you call this album... on Apple Music and Spotify, classical crossover. You have some classical elements. You play beautifully on the piano, but you've also added some synthesizers and some other electronic components to the album as well.
Yeah, it's funny. It's been released through Leaf Music Distribution, who are a classical label out of Nova Scotia, and we even had a conversation about classical crossover, about what that means, even at the label level, because it's really funny. People perceive it differently. Some people perceive classical crossover as covers of popular music, but played on a cello or a piano or something like that, whereas to me, all those artists I just named, which are more in the camp of everything you just described, it's piano, but there are synthesizers, drums, strings, it's sort of very broad, and they're all called classical crossover as well. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those genres, I suppose, so many genres. I mean, what is pop music? Do you know what I mean? Pop music could be U2, it could be Taylor Swift, it could be anything. It's popular music, and I mean, in a way, classical crossover has elements of that. It's such a very broad musical palette that could fit in there.
Now, I want to change subjects here for a moment. We'll talk about Nerve later on, but you are not just a singer-songwriter, you're also a filmmaker. Of course, you released Close to the Bone about a year or two ago, and following that, you released the Close to the Bone album. So what got you into filmmaking?
kind of came in through scoring. Scoring for me has always been something that's sort of gone alongside my, I don't know what you call it, singer-songwriter, performer career, whatever. And so I'm trying to remember the first film I ever scored, but it was definitely like probably almost 15 years ago at least.
Wow.
Right? And that was getting into it the way a lot of composers do. You know, you have a friend who kind of says to you like, oh, you play music, can you score my film? You know, which is like makes sense, but is also a little naive, because I can tell you now, having done it a lot more, obviously like playing music doesn't mean you could score films, you know, and I had to learn elements of that. So yeah, I guess I started just kind of helping friends out, and then what that meant was I saw films sort of in various stages of undress, you know, like the rest of us always watch films, they're finished, but I was seeing films that weren't, the color hadn't been finished. In some cases, especially in the indie world, like it's not even the final edit when it gets to you. It should be, but it sometimes isn't. And so I really got to learn, and then talking to those friends who were in that world, more about how films work. And I just got really, really interested in it. And then one day I had this idea for a story, which was based on a short story and a song of mine. And that became one more song, the film. And that was that way by a friend going, why don't you just try to make this? And I went, okay. And I just I did it for like $100, which was probably whatever food I bought at the time for people.
Oh, wow.
Called in favors and edited it myself and like did all that stuff. But it was rewarding, you know, it was fun.
Yeah, and one more song ended up getting you a Nickel Film Festival Award for Best Original Screenplay at the Nickel Film Awards. I believe it was like way over a decade ago now.
Yeah, I can't remember the
2011,
year.
2012-ish.
Yeah, that's right.
What was receiving that like, especially, you know, where you did this film really entirely yourself?
Yeah, it's you know, I think there was a real shine to that award to me, because I mean I kind of feel I know you've got some awards, I've got some awards. Like awards are awards, you know, they're whatever. But it's like that one was a little. It was interesting because I was so new to it. There was sort of a freshness to being like, oh, that's nice that someone did that. You know, it was literally the first thing I ever did. So that was a little surreal, to be honest. Is probably the best way to describe it, just because it was just trying something out.
Yeah, for sure. And when I eventually launched this podcast back in November, I was trying something out too. I was trying to like, you know, create this like one perfect kind of, you know, platform for people to get their music featured and tell their stories, no matter what limitations or what borders stood in their way. Right. And case in point, right over there, ECMA, Media Person of the Year for Music NL.
There you go.
But like that's just what that feeling was too, surrealness, and especially for you, where you won that Best Original Screenplay, that was a whole new territory for you because you've been so used to, you know, writing songs and singing them.
Yeah, that's right. No, for sure. It was, it was, you know, certainly those things can be nice little motivations to go, maybe I'll do another thing. And then, of course, you know, I was able to kind of take that film and then apply for a Picture Start, which is a wonderful program from NIFCO, with an actual budget, you know, so you're able to learn how a film actually gets made, you know, and how crew works and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that was sort of the beginning of that journey.
Yeah, and NIFCO now is actually called Picture NL.
No, that's Picture NL is the NLFDC, the Newfoundland and Labrador Film Development Corp.
Oh, so that's separate.
That's separate.
Oh, my apologies there.
No, it's all good. And Picture NL is a much better name than the Newfoundland and Labrador Film Development Corporation. That's a very long...
NLFDC.
Yeah, so you'd be putting it on and it would take up more than one line. So I guess at some point they're like, let's rebrand Picture NL. So that's them, but NIFCO is still NIFCO.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Well, thanks for the correction there. My apologies there.
Yeah.
But the film that came with this album, Close to the Bone, which you released last year album-wise, but released the film before that, it ended up getting some great reviews. I watched that myself, and it's a fantastic short film.
Oh,
and you recorded some shots, of course, at Wesley United Church, the home of VOWR. Shout out to you at repping the hat there.
Yes, indeed.
So why make a short film to accompany this album, or did you want to make the film first and then make the album? So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I had just started the record. I didn't even have all the songs written for it yet, maybe even just half or less. And then I watched this this beautiful film called I'm Easy to Find, which was written by Mike Mills and The National, so the band The National.
Okay.
And they had this record out by the same name that had been out for, you know, that year, and I'd listened to it a ton. And then I discovered this short film. Like I was on a Christmas tour, I think, and I was sort of after a show, and I was just on YouTube, and this popped up, and I was like, oh, okay. I guess it was suggested to me because I listened to the National so much. And then I watched this, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of tired. It's 27 minutes. I'm just going to watch the first couple and bookmark it. And then 27 minutes later, I'd finished the film. You know, it was just so compelling to me. And it's the nature of the film is a really simple concept. It's like 100 and something moments in a person's life. So it's just montage the entire time. It stars Alicia Vikander, who's in Tomb Raider and Ex Machina, and, you know, pretty big star. And it's all the music from the album, the Nationals album, but mixed up. Like there'd be like drums from one track, a vocal from another, a guitar from another, to create this score, basically. So I'm sitting there having loved this album and listened to it for, say, like 9 months, and I'm like, this is like Easter egg central is what it feels like. I'm sitting there going, oh my God, that's the drums from track 3, and that's the, you know, and I'm hearing that, but it's also working just emotionally. Like if I had just discovered this film and watched the film by itself, I would have been like, that was a cool film, you know? And I love that layering of that. I love the idea that you could just watch this film that I found and enjoy it, and it was very poignant and moving. But for someone who'd listened to the album a lot, I was getting this extra layer. And I guess I was inspired by that. Like, it's very much a one-to-one comparison there of me going, I think I could do my version of this. You know, It would look nothing like it. It would feel nothing like it. The music's going to be totally different. But I love that idea of there's an album and a film. They kind of go side by side. One informs the other a little bit. And, you know, it was sort of genre crossing, I guess, platform crossing. It all just seemed very exciting to me. And I was like, okay, this feels daunting and big, and it took years to make it happen, but it was like something I got excited about.
Do you feel like that was like your best work yet up to that point?
Yeah, I do, but you know, what I'll say is I've always felt that way, you know, and I think everyone should. I mean, you know, it's sort of like, imagine if you were like, oh God, 2011, that was a good year. It's all been downhill ever since. That would be a pretty crappy way to live, you know? So I think for me, it was like, yeah, I did. I definitely felt it was my most ambitious project. I think objectively it was my most ambitious project, but subjectively, yes, also what I like the most.
For sure. Now, of course, since then, you formed a new kind of like band. It involves yourself, Ali Duff, and Nick Coltis Clark. Nick Coltis Clark has an instrumental album himself as well, called, I believe, People, and or I think it's just NCC, but it's called the Ballast Collective. So tell me a little bit more about how this group came together, and a bit more about the name.
Totally. So first thing I'll say, so it's actually Andrea Duff, not
Andrea Duff,
and not Allie. I know it's and Allie is of course a wonderful musician, so easy to confuse that. So the Ballast Collective is it is a weird project to describe. It's funny. I just did a show last night. A couple of nights ago when this airs, or a couple of weeks ago, I guess. But I did a show with Avalon Stanley at the Battery, and I was mentioning this group because Andrew was actually in attendance at the show, and I was like, "This is a weird." Like even describing it from the stage, I'm like, it kind of takes a minute to describe, but it is a group I'm really excited about. So Nick, who does go by NCC, and he has a great album out. He's on drums, and his drum kit is actually, if you get to see it, it's a small kit, and it's actually mesh heads. It's not traditional drum kit. It's so the heads of his drums are actually sensors that when he can program on his laptop what those drum heads will be. So it's sort of like electronic drums, but a little bit on steroids. Like it can divide a snare drum up into 12 quadrants, and each quadrant can be a different instrument. So we could have like 12 different sounds or samples on just a snare drum. So hitting one side of the snare drum is one sound, the center of the snare drum is another sound, etc., etc. The rims also can be sounds, and so you're hitting the rim of the drum is one thing versus the head. It's so cool. So that's just the drums of what he can do. So he's playing drums, but sometimes he's playing marimbas or pianos on the drums.
Wow.
You know? And then I'm over there on various kinds of keys. So like hardware synths, pianos, all that stuff. And I'm kind of switching sounds as well on my station. And then we have Andrea, who I kind of jokingly call the lead singer of this instrumental band, because she's a dancer by trade, a dancer and choreographer. And she's wearing something that looks like this, basically, like Apple Watches. They're kind of about this size, and they're called Somi 1 sensors, and they actually receive MIDI information, like musical information, from our interfaces. So we actually, let's say I'm playing like a synth part, and I want to, we've all heard those kind of synths that, the filter opens up. So it's like, wah, 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 that kind of sound. So that's a knob on a keyboard. We can instead change that to be one of her sensors. So with the twist of her wrist, instead of the turn of a knob, she can affect that sound. So as she dances and moves, she's live affecting the sounds that Nick and I are playing.
That's insane.
It's pretty wild, right? And it's pretty, like, even that description's like, that's pretty long to even describe what the band is. And of course, it goes out from there. Like, the sensors could be like a single sample. So Andrea could be like, as she punches outward, it could be like a snare drum sound or a kick drum or whatever, a voice, anything you could imagine. So very, very fun, very interesting. And to us as musicians, it's this like reciprocity and this circling kind of thing, because Nick and I could perform something and we've assigned some variables to like Andrea's sensors. And as she's dancing to the music and moving, she's live affecting the sound, which we're hearing. And of course, we're reacting to that live sound.
Wow.
So now we're jamming with a dancer, as opposed to it being a dancer dancing to music, which we've all seen, and it's great, but that's been done forever.
Wow.
But this idea of the dancer actually being part of the band and having a say, I guess you would say, in the music is kind of the compelling part.
That's really, really cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at the Bannerman Brewery. You guys are going to be playing the album release show, which Hurricane Music are putting on for you guys there as well. Matt Dines and David Shears.
That's right.
Big shout out to them, former guests of the podcast.
Yes.
Is this just, so the Ballast Collective, is this really just going to be like a gigging band, or will there be like an album coming up with this?
That's a great question, actually. We have talked about an album. We're still trying to figure out what makes the most sense with that, because obviously there's a visual component since there's a dancer in this group, so how you release a record like that is sort of a question mark. But at the same time, like musically, and I should add, because I think some of this, obviously, it's kind of a bit strange, when you're describing this band. It's not the music I wouldn't call, at least so far, particularly avant-garde. There's a world where this music would be very like atonal and experimental. Do you know what I mean?
I was thinking some similar to like avant-garde.
Yeah, and it could be that, and at times it might veer a little into it. But I mean, the songs we've been writing so far have been quite accessible. It's just we arrive there via this really cool method that's visually interesting as well as musically, I think, So we've definitely considered an album, or like maybe even a visual album where it's like a live album, but there's a video to everything, so you can also see what's going on as well as hear it.
So have like visualizers with each song.
Yeah, or just like maybe we'll film a show at some point and release videos that create a playlist.
That'd be really cool.
You know what I mean? Like it's a little up in the air, but we are developing like a bigger show right now through the fall that then we're hoping to take on the road in the next year. So
that's awesome, dude. Now, this new album that you got out, it's called Nerve, and it's the first one you've had that is entirely instrumental. You sang on a majority of your albums. So what motivated you to go strictly instrumental with this new record?
Yeah, I mean, this was written during the pandemic, and it was, I actually experienced a bit of chronic pain, like sort of a chronic pain journey. I was feeling some nerve pain in my leg, hence the name. And I found I was playing guitar a lot less. I found I was able to, whatever it was, I was able to sit at the piano more comfortably. And piano is my first instrument. So I just started writing more and more music on the piano during that time, and it was sort of comforting, and it was also quite immersive, because then I was really into the sort of the console element of working in the studio and creating some of those soundscapes that are part of the record. And so, yeah, it sort of grew naturally out of this sort of difficult life moment that was also in line with the pandemic, and sort of, generating this music that to me, I think it kind of encompasses a lot of those emotions. There's comfort, there's drama, there's lots of stuff involved there. And I guess the beauty of it is, despite me explaining a bit of it there, it is sort of open to the person's interpretation even more than the average song, because it is instrumental. There's no lyric to guide you. So you can close your eyes, listen to the music, and see what you feel,
Yeah, for sure. And as I said before in a previous question, this is a classical crossover album. So there's pianos and there's synthesizers and stuff. So for people who are not familiar with this genre, what can people expect on this record?
Yeah, well, yeah, we were talking a little about like classical crossover. What even is that? It's such a broad concept because it tends to
Yeah.
be, I often joke to people, it's like often piano, often some element of strings, and then literally anything else. You know what I mean? It's like there's two kind of obvious things, and even then they're not obvious. There's some records that don't have piano that are classical crossover. So, like pop, rock, anything, it's this massive genre. But I would say, like, if you're into the music of like, sort of Max Richter, that sort of like score style music. I mentioned, Olafur Arnalds, Nils Fromm, those guys. This record is probably for you, and it's been a real journey for me now that, even just a couple of advanced copies have gone out of like hearing what people say. Like some of the guys at Fred's, for instance, were like, have you ever thought about scoring video games? There's an element to this that feels video gamey. And I'm like, I love video games. I would totally do that, So
You should definitely do that too, Ian.
Well, I'd love to, call me video game developers, but it's like just to hear what people hear. It's hard for me right now to even answer that question in a way because it's sort of like I'm still waiting for the audience input to know, like, oh, this sounds like video game music to me. Oh, this sounds like, and then they'll name, a composer that I'm not even familiar with. I'm like, well, that's cool. I got to look them up now, So that's part of the fun of it, I guess.
Yeah.
As both a musician and a fan of music,
Oh, for sure. Do you have a favorite video game?
Probably Destiny 2, to be honest. That's the one I play the most
choice.
as a like recurring. And I find it good because I can get a little obsessive with this stuff and lose my life to something. Like if it's one
Tell
of
me
these
about it.
40, 50 hour, whatever. So I find like Destiny is a good balance. If I could play it for like a half an hour now, like I played it for so many years because it's one of those online,
Yeah.
But it's such a great game, and that's a great example of like
yeah.
the score in that game is wild. Like it's some of the best orchestral score out there right now.
Me getting lost in the game, tell me about it. Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 3.
I've heard of.
Oh my god, I'm there for like 3 or 4, maybe even as far as like 7 or 8 hours, just like getting lost into a quest and doing quest on quest, and also listening to the amazing music, which is scored beautifully.
Yes.
I love playing those Japanese role-playing games too,
Yes.
where you get those very deep stories and great gameplay and great scores.
It's so interesting, like even back to Mario Brothers, like the OG Mario Brothers, the music in that game, and it's 8-bit, but it's like just the Mario Brothers theme is a genius piece of music.
Yeah,
like
it's simple but yet effective.
Yeah, and it's kind of, there's some crunchy weird chords in there and all kinds of stuff. Like people have underestimated. I don't think they do anymore because it's gone so mainstream. But I think people underestimated video game music for a long time. There's some incredible like musically incredible pieces for video games.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you're going to be celebrating the release of this album at the Bannerman Brewery June the 8th. You're going to have yourself, you're going to have NCC there, the Ballast Collective, Ching Cha. What can people expect for the show? Nancy Hines, yeah.
She's gonna be doing some oohs and ahs on a couple of songs. It's gonna be, Jing is gonna be opening with a short set, and then there's gonna be guest people, including Jing. We're gonna play together at the show. And then all those names you just named. So Nick will be performing with me on stage for, I think, pretty much the whole show. And then we'll have the Ballast Collective as a guest, Jing as a guest, Nancy as a guest. We've got Dave Shears doing some cool lights, so we're going to set up something, a bit more elaborate there. So I'm really looking forward to it. That's going to be a really special concert. Tickets are on sale now, and they're on sale at Fred's Records if you want to just go down and get a physical ticket. They're also available through the website. You can go to ianfoster.ca/nerve. That'll take you to a ticket link to buy a ticket. And of course, love for people to buy the tickets in advance. Everyone in Newfoundland is a last minute buy them at the door, but I would much rather you buy them in advance. It helps us all know what's going on.
And you're sure of like, okay, I can probably, sell out this venue. And you at least know then, like, okay, here's how many are coming in advance.
That's right. You need to know that. It certainly helps to not be as nervous. But no, it's going good so far. And we have that event. And I should also say we have, for those who like with maybe kids who want to kind of come to a more, accessible event there for them, 1 o'clock the next day, Sunday, June 9th, we're doing Fred's Records. We're doing an in-store, little shorter set, more stripped down for sure, but a little in-store event at Fred's.
Awesome. Now, aside from that, what's next for you, Ian?
Yeah, what is next for me? We're going to be doing a bunch of shows around the island, and by we, I mean Nancy and me, a couple of solo shows for me this summer with the new record. I don't think any of them have been announced yet, so I won't say what they are, but obviously ianfoster.ca, you can see the show links. So that's going to happen. A couple of other film score projects that are kind of coming up on the horizon, which again, I feel like more of that work will hopefully grow out of this album, and that'll be a win for me. You know what I mean? I love doing that work.
And I should also mention too, I forgot to ask you this. If you have a favorite song on the record, what would that be and why?
Hard to pick one, you know. I'm trying to remember, like, every song sort of has a little element of something that was like an idea, a kernel that I was like, oh, that was cool to try, and I guess I believed it worked out well enough to put it on the record. Gossamer was pretty early in the process, and that's the first single. And there's, the way that song kind of came together and the different elements, it's actually an una corda, which is like a one string per hammer instrument. Like it's like a piano, but piano is like when the little hammer hits the thing, when you hit the key and the hammer inside.
Like a hammered dulcimer.
Yeah, well, like when a piano's hammer hits usually 3 strings per note on a piano, whereas an una corda, it's only hitting 1. So it has a very unique kind of sound. It's like piano-esque, but not quite. And so it's felted as well, which means that they call this prepared piano, but it means like when you put some material between the hammer and the strings. It could mean other things too. They get all into this in music school where you put like objects in the piano and stuff to make wacky sounds, and pretty fun. But anyway, all of that, like, it sort of dulls the sound like when it hits, because it hits through the cotton or the felt to hit the hammer. Yeah, it's super interesting stuff. So Gossamer has that as its primary sound, and then we had this beautiful Strong Harbor Strings Collective came in, this quartet here, and they did some beautiful work on the strings for that one.
Wonderful. Now, ianfoster.ca/nerve is where people can get tickets for the show, and ianfoster.ca is where people can find you, what tour dates and what other projects you have on the go. But for people who want to find out more about you through social media, where can they go there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say as well, if you follow that link, ianfoster.ca/nerve, there's the add it on any platform, purchase it, all that information, so people can find all that on the same link as well to hear the record. And social media, it's facebook.ca/ianfostermusic. I do a lot of work on Substack these days, or I'm doing more work on it, and that's one of my favorite platforms. So I have Instagram, I have Twitter, all that, and certainly love when people follow me there. But I love Substack, that method of just like kind of the return of blog writing, It's really fun.
So what would the Substack be?
So that one is ianfostermusic.substack.com.
Wonderful. Well, Ian, congratulations on the release of this brand new record, Nerve, and thanks again for coming on the Musical Connections podcast for a second time. You're one of the many other 2-time guests that I've had here on this podcast, and you won't be your last time, that's for sure, once you get a new record or new film score out. So, Ian, thanks again for joining me. All the best to you in the summer ahead, and congratulations again on the release of your first classical crossover album, Nerve.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me on.